Hi students, this is Professor Tyberg, and I hope you're having a great day today. Right now I'm going to go over my interpretation of The Dream of the Rood, the Anglo-Saxon poem that we're reading in this week's module. And I'm looking forward to your responses about the Anglo-Saxon poetry. But I'll just give you some things to think about here by offering my interpretation. Okay, I really like this translation of The Dream of the Rood that's included in the Norton. Every translation will be different, of course, and there's no perfect way to translate a poem, especially an Old English poem. Every translation becomes its own interpretation. According to the footnote, this translation is by Alfred David and has been revised by R.D. Fulk. I like this translation because the translators use the word sign several times when referring to the rood, the cross. The word sign is important to us English majors because linguistic theorists have shown us that language and words themselves are signs. Signs are made up of the words themselves, called the signifier, and then the thing the word refers to, the signified. So for example, we have the word, the rood, the cross, that's the signifier, and then there's the idea or the actual cross itself, what it stands for, the signified. In the Dream of the Rood, the cross, is the most prevalent sign. And it's a sign that both literally and figuratively changes. It literally changes in the world of the poem, as the speaker notes, quote, "That splendid sight made me afraid. I beheld the sign rapidly changing clothing and colors. Now it was covered with moisture, drenched in streaming blood, now decked with treasure." And that's from lines 22 to 23. The speaker witnesses the cross change from clothed to bloody to golden, and I think this changing is partially what frightens the speaker. It's as if the speaker is having trouble figuring out exactly what this cross as a sign actually signifies, because it keeps changing. Besides literally changing, this sign, this cross, also has gone through a figurative transformation, because this cross strikes us as a different metaphor than from the story in the Bible that some of you may be familiar with. Well, in the Bible, the cross is this inanimate, passive object, a method of Roman punishment for criminals. Here in the Dream of the Rood, the cross is personified as a loyal thane to its chieftain, Christ. The cross claims that if it wanted to, it could have, quote, destroyed the foes of Christ. It's from line 38, implying that the cross itself is a strong warrior, unlike the cross from the Bible. Thus, the poet here has taken the liberty of changing our preconceived notions of what the cross stands for, which is significant since the image of the cross in our own culture is so ubiquitous and sacred and thus kind of untouchable. The cross is thought to be a sacred symbol, but this poet, in the Dream of the Rood, has the guts to play with its meaning, and in so doing the poet draws our attention to the malleability of signs. Signs change as different cultures and poets and artists manipulate them, and so we start to see that signs are not as stable as we sometimes take them to be. The users of the signs can alter the sign's meaning. So I'm interested in this poem because of the layers of meaning, because it brings up questions related to the uncertainty or anxiety about the meaning and stability of a sign, which in this case is the rood, the cross. The poet unapologetically changes the Bible story to marry the poet's own interest in Anglo-Saxon culture with the Christian story. These changes, I argue, don't succeed at truly, quote, converting the poem from pagan Anglo-Saxon poetry to Christian poetry, as some critics have argued. Instead, the poet fails, if this was even the poet's intention, because the poet participates actively in changing the signs in such a way that privileges rather than renounces the Anglo-Saxon warrior code. For example, Christ in the poem, contrary to the biblical story, is the active chieftain who intentionally and heroically climbs onto the cross. So the poet cannot be taken seriously as wanting to convert the poem completely from pagan to Christian. If the speaker of the poem experiences destabilization at the sign rapidly changing, the poet, in contrast, actively contributes to that destabilization by imposing heroic pagan values onto the Christian story. Further, the poem emphasizes the layers in literature between the poet and the reader that filter and refract meaning, as if to draw our attention to the complexities inherent in successfully representing reality through language. The first way the poet emphasizes these filters of meaning is through point of view. The poem is from the mouth of a first-person narrator whose reliability is unknown to us. We have no great reason to believe or disbelieve this narrator. Additionally, the poem is this narrator's dream vision, which adds another layer of refraction, because dreams are hazy, impressionistic visions to start with, and then trying to recount that dream to someone else, as you know, is like playing a game of telephone with details frequently lost in translation. In the world of the poem, the poet seems to take the mysticism of the speaker's dream account as greater proof of its believability. But as readers, I think the dream filter leads us to question the speaker's account. Then the poem shifts to the cross's point of view so that we have a story within a story told by a narrator who, as a cross, is now an object and not a human, and that story is within the broader framework of the first speaker's dream vision. So with these various storytellers in the poem, the poet, the dreamer, and the cross, readers have quite a substantial task before them to make sense of this poem. And I think that resonates with the idea of the rapidly changing sign. The poet, by weaving Germanic pagan poetry into the Christian story of the crucifixion, demonstrates that stories, language, and metaphor as signs are not static or stable, and the line from the poem about, quote, beholding the rapidly changing sign supports, I think, this theory of instability. Later in the poem, the translators use the word sign a couple more times. For example, the cross tells how over time, people everywhere, quote, pray to this sign in line 83. They pray to the cross, which is significant because if the sign is rapidly changing, as we see earlier in the poem, then praying to it raises some questions. People would seem to want a stable sign to pray to in order to give them confidence that they are praying to the God they are intending to pray to, so that the image of the cross resonates with their particular style of belief. But this poem suggests that people pray to a changing sign, a changing cross. The cross goes on to explain that through Christ, the cross was able to, quote, open the right way of life to language bearers. That's in line 89. And I interpret this kenning language bearers for people. Calling them language bearers is, I interpret it as significant because language is a slippery mode with which we communicate. And so it's fitting that the changing sign that the people pray to rescues the language bearers who carry the burden of uncertain language and signs. So that's my take, and I hope it gives you something to think about, and I'm looking forward to reading your own ideas about this poem or the other Anglo-Saxon poetry that we read for this week. All right, have a great day, and I'll see you online.